7 men smiled through sold-out stadiums, broke Billboard records, and addressed the United Nations, all while some of them were quietly falling apart inside. BTS built a billion-dollar empire on perfection, but perfection has a price. What happens when the world's biggest band never gets to stop? When "I'm Fine" becomes a performance in itself. From panic attacks hidden behind choreography to hiatus announcements that shook an entire industry, this is what relentless professionalism really costs. These are 7 stories the stage was never meant to show. Number 7. The Sunshine Tax. J-Hope. There is an unwritten rule inside BTS that every fan knows but rarely questions. When the energy drops, Jung Ho-suk picks it up. He's the mood maker, the human shot of espresso, the member who screams, "I'm your hope, you're my hope, I'm J-Hope," until the room believes it. But here's the thing about being the sun. Nobody ever asks the sun if it is tired of shining. And Jung Ho-suk has been performing that role since long before BTS ever set foot on a stage. He grew up in Gwangju, South Korea, trained as a street dancer, and won a national dance competition as a teenager. When he entered Big Hit Entertainment as a trainee, he was not there to become a rapper or a vocalist. He was a dancer, period. The transition into full idol training hit him hard. He's spoken openly about the fact that during the trainee period, he seriously considered leaving the company. The pressure of learning skills outside his comfort zone, combined with the uncertainty of whether BTS would even debut, pushed him close to walking away. RM personally convinced him to stay. That moment is well documented in BTS's own retrospectives, and it's worth sitting with. The person the group would eventually depend on for energy nearly wasn't there at all. Once BTS debuted in June 2013, Ho-suk locked into a role that would define the next decade of his life. He became the reliable one, the member who hyped up exhausted bandmates during grueling world tours, who kept variety show appearances alive with his reactions, who smiled through airport mobs and 16-hour rehearsal days. ARMY, the BTS fandom, gave him the nickname Sunshine, and he wore it like armor. But armor gets heavy. In 2018, J-Hope released his mixtape Hope World, which debuted at number 63 on the Billboard 200, making him the highest-charting Korean solo act on that chart at the time. The project was bright and playful on the surface, but if you listened carefully, there were cracks, moments where Ho-suk wrestled with whether his cheerful image was a cage. By 2022, those cracks became the entire foundation. His solo album Jack in the Box arrived with tracks like More and Arson, songs that ditched the sunshine concept entirely. In Arson, he rapped about feeling burned out, questioning whether the fire that drove his career was consuming him from the inside. Critics noted the sharp tonal shift. This was not the J-Hope who danced through Dynamite. This was a man confronting what years of emotional labor had cost him. Weeks before that album dropped, BTS held their now famous Festa dinner in June 2022, where they announced a hiatus to focus on solo work and personal health. During that conversation, Ho-suk broke down. He talked about feeling like the group had lost its direction, about the pressure of constantly performing happiness when the reality behind the scenes was far more complicated. It was one of the rawest moments ever broadcast by the group. Then he became the first BTS member to headline a major American music festival when he took the stage at Lollapalooza in Chicago in July 2022. He later admitted the pressure was enormous, performing alone, without 6 brothers beside him, in front of over 100,000 people. In April 2023, he became the first member to begin mandatory military service, stepping away from everything. The man who spent a decade making sure everyone else was okay finally had no stage to perform on, no role to fill, no room to light up. Number 6. The oldest who never felt enough. Jin. In most K-pop groups, the eldest member is the pillar, the one with the most experience, the steadiest voice, the leader everyone leans on. Kim Sok-jin was none of those things when he walked into Big Hit Entertainment, and he knew it. Jin did not audition. He was scouted off the street near Konkuk University because a Big Hit casting agent saw his face and thought he looked like an idol. That is how it started. Not with talent, not with years of training, not with a burning dream to be a musician, but with the genetic luck of sharp cheekbones and broad shoulders. And Jin has carried the weight of that origin story for over a decade. When he entered the trainee system, he had zero background in singing, zero in dancing. He was surrounded by trainees like Jungkook, who had been recruited by multiple agencies, and Suga and RM, who had years of underground rap experience. Jin was the oldest person in the room and the least equipped for what the room demanded. In Korean culture, being the hung, the eldest, comes with an expectation of competence and authority. Jin had the age, but not the arsenal, and that gap ate at him. He has spoken about this repeatedly in interviews and in BTS's own content. During a 2017 concert he broke down on stage, telling fans that he felt he was always running behind the other members, that no matter how hard he practiced, the distance between his skill level and theirs never seemed to close. This was not a scripted moment. It was a man standing in front of tens of thousands of people, admitting that the applause did not fix the voice in his head, telling him he was not good enough. His song, Awake, from the 2016 album Wings, is essentially a thesis statement on that insecurity. The lyrics are blunt. He sings about knowing he might never fly, never reach the heights of the people beside him, but choosing to walk toward them anyway, even if his feet are bleeding. It charted, fans loved it, and none of that validation erased the feeling. BTS members themselves have confirmed that Jin consistently logged the most hours in the practice room, specifically because dancing did not come naturally to him. While members like J-Hope and Jimin could learn choreography in a fraction of the time, Jin would stay behind, drilling the same 8 counts over and over, often late into the night. He turned his deficit into discipline, but discipline powered by self-doubt has a shelf life. Then there was the label that followed him everywhere, visual. In K-pop, the visual is the member designated as the face of the group, the one whose primary role is to be attractive. Jin leaned into it publicly with his worldwide handsome persona, a self-given title he delivered with enough comedy to make it charming rather than arrogant. But humor was the shield. Behind the jokes and the flying kisses was a man who understood that a significant portion of the industry saw his looks as his ceiling. He studied, he trained, he improved his vocals dramatically over the years. His performance of Epiphany during the Love Yourself tour in 2018 proved he could command a stadium with his voice alone. But the visual tag never fully came off. On December 13, 2022, Jin became the first BTS member to enlist for mandatory South Korean military service. He was 30 years old. Before he left, he shaved his head on a live broadcast, laughing through it the way he always did, turning vulnerability into content, making sure Army smiled even as they cried. He served as an active duty soldier in the 5th Infantry Division and was discharged in June 2024. He spent 18 months in a world where no one cared about Billboard charts or fan chants, where his face did not define his rank, where he was just another soldier doing his time. For a man who spent years questioning whether he belonged in BTS, the military might have been the first place where the questions simply did not apply. Number 5. The leader who had no leader, RM. Somebody had to speak first. Somebody had to stand in front of the United Nations General Assembly and deliver a message to the world on behalf of a K-pop group that half the room had never heard of. Somebody had to translate not just Korean into English, but an entire culture into a language the West would take seriously. That somebody was always Kim Namjoon. He did not volunteer for the job. The job was built into his bones the day Bang Si-hyuk chose him as the foundation of BTS. RM was the first member recruited. The group was literally constructed around him. He was an underground rapper in the Hongdae scene, going by Runch Randa, a teenager with a reported IQ of 148 who had scored in the top 1% on South Korea's national university entrance exams. He could have done anything. He chose hip-hop, and hip-hop handed him a crown he never asked to wear. Being the leader of BTS is not a ceremonial title. In K-pop, the leader is the liaison between the group and management, the spokesperson for every press conference, the face that takes the first hit when things go wrong publicly. Namjoon has carried that weight since he was 18 years old. By the time BTS became the biggest act on the planet, the weight had compounded into something that no amount of stadium applause could offset. He has spoken about this with a level of honesty that most public figures would never risk. In multiple interviews and in BTS's own documentary series, Burn the Stage, he discussed the loneliness of leadership, how the members bring their struggles to him, but he does not always have someone to bring his own struggles to. The leader has no leader. That sentence sounds poetic until you realize it describes a real person absorbing the emotional load of 6 other men, a multi-billion-dollar company, and a global fandom of millions with no equivalent support structure above him. His 2018 mixtape, Mono, was the sound of that pressure leaking out. It was not a BTS record. It was Namjoon, alone, writing about rain he did not want to stop, because sadness had become more familiar than happiness. The track Forever Rain is 7 minutes of a man sitting inside his own depression and finding it more honest than the spotlight waiting outside. Tokyo captured the dissociation of being globally famous, yet feeling invisible in a foreign city. Mono debuted at number 26 on the Billboard 200, and fans praised its beauty without always recognizing that beauty was built from genuine pain. Then came the speeches. In September 2018, RM addressed the United Nations General Assembly as part of the Love Myself campaign with UNICEF. He stood at a podium where world leaders had stood and told a global audience to speak themselves, to find their names, to find their voices. The speech went viral. He delivered it in English he had largely taught himself by watching the American sitcom Friends as a teenager. What the cameras did not show was the pressure behind that podium, the knowledge that a mispronounced word or an awkward pause would be broadcast across every continent, that he was representing not just BTS, but South Korea's entire cultural export on the world stage. He returned to the UN in 2020 and again in 2021. Each time, the stakes grew. During the 2022 Festa dinner, Namjoon broke down discussing how he felt BTS had lost its identity, that the relentless cycle of producing and promoting had disconnected the group from the music that had defined them. He described feeling like a machine running on fumes, questioning whether the version of RM the world loved was even a real person or just a product. His 2022 solo album, Indigo, was framed as an archive of his 20s, a record of searching for meaning in museums, in conversations with artists, in anything that was not the idol industry. He called it the last archive of his youth. It was the sound of a man trying to figure out who Kim Namjoon actually is when the stage lights go off and the leader title is not required. Number 4. The Man Behind the Mask, V. Kim Tae-young was invisible before he was famous. While the other BTS members were being introduced to fans through blog posts, video logs, and social media teasers in the months leading up to debut, Tae-young was kept hidden. Big Hit Entertainment made the deliberate decision to conceal him as a secret member, only revealing his existence on June 13, 2013, the day BTS officially debuted. From the very first moment the public knew he existed, he was already performing. There was no warm-up, no gradual introduction, no chance for people to get to know the real Kim Tae-young before the stage version took over. That gap between the person and the performer would go on to define his entire struggle. Tae-young grew up in Gyeocheong, a rural farming town in South Korea's Gyeongsang province. His family was not wealthy. His grandmother played a central role in raising him while his parents worked, and he has spoken with deep emotion about her influence on his life. She eventually passed away, and the loss hit him in a way that the public only caught in fragments. A tearful moment at a concert here, a quiet social media post there. Grief does not schedule itself around world tours, but the idol industry expects you to perform regardless. In Korean pop culture, Taeyong is often described as having a 4D personality, a term used for people whose thought patterns and reactions are unpredictable, eccentric, and charmingly offbeat. Fans loved it. They clipped his unexpected comments, his sudden bursts of energy, his strange humor. But being labeled quirky by millions of people has a flip side. It becomes an expectation. Every interaction gets filtered through the lens of, "That's just Taeyong being Taeyong," which makes it dangerously easy for real pain to be mistaken for personality. Between 2018 and 2019, fans began noticing something shift. The usual brightness dimmed. Taeyong appeared quieter during group content, less spontaneous in live broadcasts, visibly withdrawn during events that would normally have drawn out his energy. He later acknowledged going through a profoundly difficult period. During a 2019 concert, he revealed to the audience that he had been dealing with the loss of someone close to him, a personal grief he had been carrying silently while maintaining a full performance schedule. He cried on stage, and the arena cried with him. But the next night, there was another show, another city, another stage that required the 4D version of V to show up on command. His music reflected the fracture. Stigma from the 2016 album Wings carried lyrics soaked in guilt and the feeling of being judged for who he was beneath the surface. Inner Child from Map of the Soul 7 in 2020 was a letter to his younger self, the boy from Gyeochang who had no idea what was coming, who could not have prepared for what fame would demand of him. The song was tender and aching in a way that went beyond artistic choice. It sounded like a man trying to make peace with the distance between who he used to be and who the world had turned him into. In 2023, Taeyong released his solo album Layover, a project built on jazz-influenced R&B that stripped away the spectacle entirely. There were no elaborate choreographies, no explosive title tracks designed for virality. It was quiet, intimate, and deliberately small, as if he was reclaiming the right to exist at a volume lower than what the industry demanded. The album debuted at number 2 on the Billboard 200. Even his whisper was louder than most artists' shout, and there was no escaping the irony that the project built on wanting to slow down still generated a commercial storm. In December 2023, Taeyong enlisted for mandatory military service, joining the Special Forces unit. He went from stadiums to barracks, from millions of eyes to a regimented life where individuality is intentionally erased. For someone who spent years being watched, parsed, and projected onto by a global audience, the anonymity of military service may have offered something that fame never could: the freedom to just be a person, unnamed and unperformed, even if for a while.
Number 3. The boy who never got to be a boy. Jungkook. Jungkook was 13 years old when he left his family in Busan and moved to Seoul alone. Not for school, not for a summer program. He moved to become a trainee at Big Hit Entertainment, a company so small at the time that choosing it over the 6 other agencies that had offered him a spot seemed like a gamble no rational person would take. He picked Big Hit because he watched RM perform and something clicked. He was a child making a life-altering decision based on instinct, and that instinct would eventually lead him to the top of the global music industry. But it would also take his entire adolescence in the process. When BTS debuted on June 13, 2013, Jungkook was 15. Not 15 in the way most teenagers are 15, worrying about exams and awkward school dances. He was 15 standing on a stage in front of cameras, learning choreography that would be dissected by millions, recording songs about struggles he had barely lived long enough to understand. He went through puberty on camera. His voice changed in real time across albums. His face matured in photo shoots that were archived and compared by fans who tracked every physical shift like a timeline. There is no version of Jungkook's teenage years that was not content. The industry gave him a title early, Golden Maknae. Maknae means the youngest, and golden was attached because Jungkook appeared to be supernaturally good at everything. Singing, dancing, drawing, filming, athletics. Whatever he touched seemed to work. Fans celebrated it. The label became iconic. But what nobody talks about is the psychological trap embedded inside that word. When you are called golden at 15, the expectation is that you stay golden at 16, at 20, at 25, with no room for failure, no margin for average, no permission to simply be okay at something. Every stumble becomes a story. Every off night becomes a headline. The golden standard does not allow for rust, and Jungkook has carried that pressure for more than a decade. Behind the talent was a kid battling serious shyness. Early BTS content from 2013 and 2014 shows a Jungkook who could barely make eye contact during group interviews, who hid behind his hyungs during variety show appearances, who visibly struggled to express himself when the conversation turned personal. He has spoken about this in later years, describing a social anxiety that made basic human interaction feel overwhelming, even as his job demanded that he perform confidence in front of millions. The other members essentially raised him. He has said directly that BTS became his family, that the 6 older men in that group taught him how to function as a person, because he skipped the part of life where normal social development happens. He did not have a typical friend group. He did not go to a regular school in any meaningful sense. His entire framework for human connection was built inside a dorm with 6 bandmates and a schedule that left almost no room for anything outside the machine. In BTS's 2018 documentary series Burn the Stage, there is footage of Jungkook collapsing backstage during the Wings tour, physically broken from performing through exhaustion. He was 20 years old. The cameras captured him being helped off his feet, and the next scene showed him back on stage the following night, hitting every mark. The golden Maknae does not get sick days. In 2023, Jungkook released his solo album Golden and the single 7 featuring Lotto, which debuted at #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, making him the first BTS solo member to reach that peak. He followed it with Standing Next to You, proving he could carry a global pop career entirely on his own shoulders. But in his final Weverse live broadcast before enlisting for military service in December 2023, he was not the golden anything. He was a 26-year-old man sitting alone in front of a phone camera, crying, telling Army he did not know how to say goodbye, because they were the only constant he had known since he was a child. He enlisted alongside V that same month, trading a world where he had been famous since before he could legally drive, for one where he was just another soldier with a shaved head and a serial number.
Number 2, the body that was never good enough. Jimin. Park Jimin was the last person added to BTS. He joined Big Hit Entertainment as a trainee after transferring from Busan High School of Arts, where he had been the top student in contemporary dance. He arrived later than everyone else, trained for the shortest amount of time, and debuted with the quiet terror that he had not earned his spot. That feeling, the suspicion that he did not deserve to be there, would burrow into his mind and stay for years. And it would manifest in the most visible, most physically destructive way possible. Jimin stopped eating. Not in the casual way people sometimes skip meals when they are busy. He stopped eating in a systematic, prolonged, dangerous way that he has since discussed with a level of openness that is almost unheard of in the K-pop industry. During the Wings era in 2016, he admitted that there were stretches where he consumed only 1 meal over the span of 10 days. He wanted to be thinner. He wanted sharper features. He wanted visible abs because performances demanded he lift his shirt, and he believed the audience would reject the body underneath if it did not meet an impossible standard. He fainted multiple times. In BTS's 2018 documentary Burn the Stage, cameras captured the aftermath. Jimin backstage, barely able to stand, other members visibly distressed. RM and Suga have both spoken publicly about confronting Jimin about his eating habits, pleading with him to take care of himself, watching a friend damage his own body in real time and feeling powerless to stop it. This was not a private battle. It played out in hotel hallways and dressing rooms with cameras rolling, and the footage was released to millions of viewers because the group had made a commitment to showing their reality, even when that reality was a 21-year-old starving himself to look the way he thought the world demanded. The K-pop industry has a well-documented culture of extreme physical standards. Idols are weighed publicly, put on restrictive diets by management, and evaluated on appearance with the same rigor as vocal or dance ability. Jimin entered that system already carrying deep insecurity about his looks. He once said he considered himself the least attractive member of BTS, and the system confirmed every fear. The feedback loop was relentless. He would restrict food, perform at an elite level despite running on almost nothing, receive praise for how he looked on stage, and internalize the message that the pain was worth it. His artistry, meanwhile, was screaming what his interviews were too polished to say. Lie, his solo track from Wings, was a contemporary dance performance wrapped in lyrics about being suffocated by deception, the deception of performing wellness while falling apart. The choreography was so physically punishing that it left him breathless every single night of the tour, and he refused to simplify it. Perfectionism was not a work ethic for Jimin, it was a compulsion. Members have described him as consistently the last person to leave the practice room, running routines dozens of times after everyone else had gone to sleep, treating his body like a machine that owed him output regardless of whether he had given it fuel. In December 2018, he released Promise on SoundCloud for free. The song broke the platform's record for the most streamed track in its first 24 hours. It was a gentle, acoustic promise to himself to stop being so cruel to the person in the mirror, to try loving himself the way ARMY loved him. He wrote it during one of his darkest periods, and the softness of the melody stood in stark contrast to the violence he had been inflicting on his own body. His 2023 solo album Face was titled as a direct confrontation with himself. The lead single, Like Crazy, debuted at #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, making him the first Korean solo artist to achieve that milestone. The song was about drinking alone, about the haze of trying to numb something that would not go away. It charted globally, won awards, and cemented Jimin as a solo force, and none of it undid the years of damage. He has stood on stages in front of hundreds of thousands of people who would have told him he was extraordinary exactly as he was, and he could not hear them over the voice that said he was not enough. That is not a metaphor. That is what an eating disorder does. It replaces every external signal with an internal lie and makes the lie feel more real than the applause.
Number 1. The man who rapped his suicide note and lived. Suga. Min Yoongi almost did not make it, not in the way people say that casually about celebrities who had it rough before fame. He almost did not make it in the most literal, most irreversible sense of those words. Before he was Suga, before he was August D, before he stood on stages in sold-out arenas across 6 continents, he was a broke teenager in Daegu, writing lyrics about wanting to die. And unlike most artists who hint at darkness through metaphor, Yoongi said it plainly, on record, with his full chest, and dared the world to look away. He grew up in a family that did not have money. He fell in love with music through an old keyboard, teaching himself to compose and produce in conditions that were nowhere close to adequate. As a teenager, he entered Daegu's underground rap scene under the name Gloss, earning respect in a community that valued raw skill over polish. When he got the opportunity to audition for Big Hit Entertainment, he took it, not because he dreamed of being an idol, but because it was a door and he'd been knocking on walls for years. Training was brutal, money was non-existent. He has described periods where he had to choose between eating a meal and paying for the bus to get to the studio. He chose the bus. He delivered food as a part-time job to survive, riding a motorcycle through Daegu's streets, and during one of those shifts, he was hit by a car. The accident injured his shoulder severely. He told no one at the company. He kept training, kept rehearsing, kept pushing through pain that would require surgical intervention years later, surgery he finally underwent in November 2020, 7 years into BTS's career. He hid a broken body because he could not afford to be seen as broken.
When BTS debuted in 2013, Yoongi channeled everything into the music, but it was his 2016 solo mixtape, released under the name August D, that tore the curtain completely open. The track, The Last, is not a song, it is a clinical confession set to a beat. In it, he raps explicitly about being diagnosed with social anxiety disorder, obsessive-compulsive disorder, and depression. He describes panic attacks. He describes compulsive behaviors he could not control. He references self-harm in language so direct that it left no room for interpretation. This was a member of the biggest boy band on earth, publicly cataloging his psychiatric diagnoses in a genre and an industry where mental illness was still treated as taboo or weakness. The mixtape was released for free. Millions downloaded it. The conversation it ignited within the K-pop fandom about mental health was unprecedented. Yoongi did not soften the message in the years that followed. His second mixtape, D2 in 2020, carried the same honesty with added perspective, a man looking back at his lowest points with the clarity of someone who survived them, but refuses to pretend they did not happen. His 2023 album, D-Day, completed the August D trilogy and launched his first solo world tour, filling venues across Asia, North America, and Europe. He performed songs about depression and suicidal ideation in front of tens of thousands of fans who sang every word back to him. The boy who could not afford dinner was now headlining stadiums with his pain, and the pain had not disappeared, it had been repurposed into something that made other people feel less alone in theirs. Offstage, Yoongi put his money where his words were. He donated 100 million Korean won to the Korea Pediatric Cancer Foundation in 2019, timed quietly to coincide with his birthday, and made public only after the organization disclosed it. He contributed directly to the Love Myself campaign with UNICEF, a partnership he helped shape within BTS that raised billions of won for anti-violence programs targeting children and young people worldwide. He did not just talk about suffering, he funded its opposition. In September 2023, he began mandatory military service as a social service agent, a designation linked to his shoulder injury that had never fully healed from that motorcycle accident over a decade earlier. The shoulder that was shattered delivering food so he could afford to make music. The shoulder he hid. The shoulder the industry never paused long enough to let him fix properly until the damage was permanent. Min Yoongi turned his darkest chapters into the most honest music his generation has ever heard. He did not romanticize his pain. He reported it, clinically, specifically, unflinchingly, and in doing so, gave millions of people the vocabulary to describe what they were feeling but could not name.